The hall had never been this quiet before. Not the kind of quiet that settles after a long day, not the peaceful silence of a sleeping house. This was the kind of quiet that presses against your ears like something heavy, the kind that makes your heartbeat feel too loud, the kind that 31 women standing in a row had collectively created because no one of them was willing to be the first to breathe wrong. Kale Draven stood at the head of the great hall of Aldermore, and the room arranged itself around him the way furniture arranges itself around a wall, not because it chose to, but because there was simply no other option. He was tall in the way that mountains are tall, not aggressively, not performatively, just undeniably. His dark hair was cut close on the sides and left longer on top, and he had not bothered to style it for the occasion, which told anyone paying attention everything they needed to know about how much this ceremony meant to him. Which was nothing. Which was exactly nothing. He stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his jaw set, his grey eyes moving slowly down the line of women the council had assembled for the 33rd claiming ceremony of his reign. He looked at each face the way a man looks at a menu in a restaurant he has already decided to leave. Polite. Absent. Finished before he started. The women were not ugly. That was never the point, and everyone in the hall knew it. They were daughters of allied families, daughters of high-ranking pack members, daughters of elders who had spent the past 3 months coaching them on how to stand and what to say and how to make eye contact without flinching. They had worn their best clothes. They had fixed their hair. They had told themselves, each of them privately, that they would be different. That they would be the one who finally made Kale Draven look twice. And every single one of them, standing in that line, had already silently decided they would not step forward. Not because they lacked courage in their regular lives. 2 of the women in that line had fought off territorial disputes that would have made lesser people run. One had survived the winter that killed livestock across 4 settlements and had not lost a single member of her household. Another had rebuilt her family's name after her father disgraced it, and had done so entirely on her own. They were not weak women. But Kale Draven was not a normal problem. He had ruled Aldermore for 11 years, ascending to the position of Mega Alpha King at 23 after his father's health declined suddenly and the council had no other candidate who could hold the territory together. He had held it together. He had done it without cruelty, without corruption, without the kind of small viciousness that power so often produces in people who were never sure they deserved it. He was fair. He was decisive. He kept his word. He was also, by every observable measure, completely alone. Not alone in the way of someone who preferred solitude. Alone in the way of someone who had stopped expecting company to arrive. There was a difference, and the people who paid attention, the ones who had watched him long enough to notice what was underneath the authority, saw it clearly. They saw how he dismissed the council meetings the moment they were finished rather than lingering to talk. They saw how he always sat at the head of the table and always ate quickly and never seemed to look at anything in the room for longer than was strictly necessary. They saw how his keep, large enough for a full household, had exactly 1 set of dishes in the cabinet that got used, and the rest stood behind glass like objects in a museum, untouched. The elders said he was cursed. The younger pack members said he was too cold to bond. The women who had stood in this line before him said nothing publicly, because there was nothing polite to say about walking away from the most powerful alpha in 4 territories with your pride intact and your feet carrying you toward the exit faster than you intended. What they said privately, to each other, in low voices over tea and behind closed doors, was simpler. He looked through you. Not past you, not over you. Through. Like you were a window and he was trying to see something on the other side that you were unfortunately blocking. He stood now at the front of the hall, and he looked through 31 women, and he waited. The ceremony required him to wait. The council had written it that way, built into the old tradition the specific humiliation of a man who held absolute power standing in a room full of people and waiting to see if anyone would choose him. The elders called it a safeguard against coercion. Kale had come to understand it as a ritual of diminishment, a reminder that even kings could be unwanted, and that wanting and being wanted were 2 entirely different things. He did not look embarrassed. That was the thing about Kale Draven that even his detractors had to acknowledge, he never looked embarrassed. He had the kind of stillness that came not from coldness but from long practice in making peace with difficult realities. He had stood in this hall before. He would stand here again. He had accepted, somewhere in the quiet part of himself he rarely examined, that the line would always be full and the space in front of him would always be empty. Elder Hadwin cleared his throat from his position to the left of the ceremonial dais. He was an old man with sharp eyes and the practiced neutrality of someone who had presided over many uncomfortable situations. He looked at the line. He looked at Kale. He looked at his ceremonial notes as though they might tell him something different from what they always told him. "The floor is open," Hadwin said. His voice carried in the quiet. "Any woman who wishes to formally present herself to the king may step forward." The silence that followed had texture. It had weight. It pressed against the walls and the high-beamed ceiling and the rows of candles that lit the hall and the faces of the 31 women who stood straight and still and said nothing. Kale did not blink. He thought about the fruit bowl in his kitchen that he had stopped filling 2 years ago because there was no point in keeping fruit when you ate alone. He thought about the chair at his dining table that faced the window, the one he had bought thinking he would want to look outside during meals, and how he had turned it to face the wall after the first month because looking outside made the room feel larger in a way that felt wrong. He thought about the wolf inside him, the part of him that was old and instinctual and still, despite everything, wanted to run beside someone. He pressed that thought down. He had gotten very good at pressing that thought down. "I will give the floor one more moment," Elder Hadwin said, and even he, who had presided over 32 of these ceremonies, sounded slightly tired of it. And then the door at the back of the hall opened. It did not open dramatically. It did not swing wide or crash against the wall. It opened the way doors open when someone is pushing through them while also managing a small problem with their footwear, which is to say it opened in 2 awkward stages, and the woman who came through it arrived slightly sideways, one hand still on the handle behind her, the other reaching down to fix the strap of a sandal that had decided this was its moment to fail. She straightened up. She was not what anyone in the hall would have described as a woman who commanded attention. She was of average height, wearing a dress that fit well but was clearly not new, her light brown hair pinned up in a way that suggested she had done it herself in a hurry and was aware it was not quite right. She had a small smudge of something on the left side of her jaw that no one had told her about, possibly because she had arrived after everyone else and there had been no one nearby to mention it. She looked at the hall. She looked at the 31 women in the line. She looked at Elder Hadwin. She looked at Kale. She was late because she had stopped on the street 3 blocks from the hall to help a small boy find his mother after he lost her in the market crowd, and she had not left until she saw them reunited, which had taken 14 minutes, and those 14 minutes were the reason she was arriving now instead of 20 minutes ago. She was not supposed to be here at all. Her name was Lyra Voss. She was an Omega, the lowest designation in the pack hierarchy, a classification that meant she held no territory, no formal rank, no inherited standing. She worked at the settlement's medical post 3 mornings a week doing administrative work and spent the rest of her time doing the 1,000 small things that people of her designation were expected to do quietly and without complaint. She had not attended the lottery sign-up meeting because she had been covering a shift for a colleague who was sick. Her name had been entered by a park secretary who was simply working through a residential list and had not known, or had not thought to check, that Lyra had not consented to the process. She had received her summons notice 4 days ago. She had stood in her small apartment holding the official envelope with its silver seal and read it 3 times. Then she had sat down. Then she had stood up again. Then she had called her friend Nell, who lived 1 floor below her and knew everything about everyone in Aldermore, and Nell had confirmed what Lyra already suspected, which was that there was no legal mechanism to remove your name from the summons once it had been issued, and that failure to appear was considered a formal insult to the king's household, and that she was going to have to go. You could just stand in the line and not step forward, Nell had said. Everyone does. It's basically tradition at this point. Lyra had thought about that. She had thought about it for 4 days. She stood now at the back of the hall, 40 feet from the most powerful alpha in 4 territories, and she looked at him, and she thought, he looks tired. Not physically tired. The other kind. The kind that comes from carrying something for a long time and not being able to put it down. She walked forward through the hall. Not quickly, not dramatically, just forward, because stopping in the middle of the floor seemed worse than continuing. She found the end of the line of women. She stood in it. Elder Hadwin looked at her with the calm of a man who had learned not to show surprise. "You are late," he said. "I know," Lyra said. "I apologize. There was a lost child." Hadwin looked at her for a moment. "Your name?" "Lyra Voss." He checked his list. He made a small mark. He returned his attention to the room. "As I was saying," he said, "the floor remains open." The silence settled again. The 31 women held their positions. Cale stood at the front of the hall, and his eyes moved to the end of the line, to the woman who had arrived late with a broken sandal strap and a smudge on her jaw, and he looked at her the way he looked at everyone else in the line. She looked back at him. Not nervously. Not boldly, either. Not with the calculated confidence of someone who had practiced this. She looked at him the way you look at a problem you have just noticed and are deciding whether it is yours to solve. Something in Cale's chest did something he did not have a name for. He fired it away. He pressed it down. He waited for her to look away the way everyone else did. She didn't. Elder Hadwin drew breath to deliver the ceremonial closing words, the ones that ended 32 ceremonies before this one, the formal declaration that the floor had been offered and declined and that the claiming ceremony would be rescheduled at the council's discretion. The words did not come out. They did not come out because, at the precise moment Hadwin opened his mouth, the woman at the end of the line raised her hand. Not dramatically. Not with a speech or a declaration or the kind of sweeping gesture that the old ceremonial text described. She raised her hand the way you raise your hand in a meeting when you have a question you are not sure is relevant but you are going to ask anyway. Then she stepped forward. The hall did not move. 31 women stared. The council members along the side wall stared. Elder Hadwin, who had seen everything in 40 years of service to the park and believed very few things could still surprise him, stared. Cale Draven stood at the head of the hall and looked at the only woman who had ever walked toward him instead of away. His expression did not change. He had too many years of practice for that. But somewhere behind the stillness, behind the long practice quiet, something shifted. Something that had been sitting in one position for 11 years very slowly turned. He did not know what to do with that. He had not expected to need to know. Lyra Voss stopped 6 feet in front of him. She was looking at him with the calm, direct attention of someone who had made a decision and was not going to complicate it with second-guessing now. Up close, he could see the smudge on her jaw. He could see that her sandal strap had been refastened with what appeared to be a small safety pin. He could see that she was not trembling, not performing, not waiting for him to be impressed. She just looked at him. Like he was a person. Like he was, specifically, a person who had been standing in this hall for a very long time, and she had only just arrived, and she was here now. Cale opened his mouth. He was not entirely sure what he was going to say. He said, "You're late." "I know," she said. Someone needed help. He looked at her. She looked at him. The hall held its breath around them like a parenthesis waiting to close. And Cale Draven, who had stood in this room 32 times and never once found a reason to stay, did not leave. Lyra Voss had not, if she was being completely honest with herself, thought past the moment of stepping forward. That was a problem she recognized immediately after the ceremony was formally suspended, which happened 12 minutes after she raised her hand, after Elder Hadwin recovered his composure and launched into the procedural announcements he clearly had not expected to need, the ones about the 3-day trial period and the shared quarters arrangement and the public appearances required by tradition before a bond could be formally recognized. She stood at the front of the hall and listened to Hadwin explain the process and thought, "I did not think this through." She had stepped forward because standing still had felt like the wrong answer. That was the truth of it. Not bravery, not a plan, not some long-harbored ambition to become the mate of the most powerful alpha in 4 territories. She had stood in the line for approximately 4 minutes and watched the silence build and watched 31 women choose the safe thing with practiced ease, and something in her heart simply refused to be one more person who looked at a human being standing alone and decided it was none of her business. This was, Her friend Nell would later tell her, a character flaw she had always had. Lyra had once taken in a stray dog that bit 3 of her neighbors before she figured out he was terrified of loud noises and taught him to calm down, which had taken 6 months. She had once stayed for 4 hours at the bedside of an elderly woman in the medical post who had no family to call and was frightened and needed someone to be there. She had once spent an entire afternoon helping a man she had never met untangle an administrative dispute with the council offices because the process confused him and no one else would slow down enough to explain it. She did not think of these things as remarkable. She thought of them as obvious. When someone needed help, you helped them. When someone was alone, you noticed. When a door was standing open and everyone else was walking past it, you went through it. She had not, however, anticipated that this particular door led to 3 days in the King's Keep with a man who communicated primarily through long silences and the strategic absence of facial expressions. She arrived at the keep late in the afternoon of the first day. A staff member she never got the name of showed her to a guest room that was larger than her apartment, furnished with the kind of careful elegance that suggested someone had spent a great deal of money on comfort but no one ever actually sat in the chairs. The bed was made with 4 pillows. There was a small desk, a window that looked out over the eastern courtyard, and an adjoining washroom with towels that were folded with architectural precision. She unpacked the bag she had brought, which took about 3 minutes because she had only had 4 days to prepare and had not been sure what to bring to a formal claiming trial when you had not expected to be attending one. She put her extra clothes in the wardrobe. She set her worn copy of a field medicine reference book on the bedside table because it was a comfort object and she was not going to pretend otherwise. She fixed her sandal strap properly with a needle and thread she found in the washroom kit. Then she went to find the kitchen. Not because she was hungry. Because the kitchen was where you understood a household. You could learn more about a person from their kitchen in 10 minutes than from a formal conversation in an hour. It told you what they valued, what they neglected, how they fed themselves, whether they ate alone. She found the kitchen at the end of a long corridor on the ground floor. It was large, clean, well-equipped. The kind of kitchen that had been designed for a household of people and was being used by one. She opened the cabinets. There were dishes for 12. Good ones, clearly expensive. They stood in stacked rows behind glass and had the particular quality of objects that are maintained but not used. The everyday dishes, the ones that had been used, were 4 plates, 4 bowls, and 4 cups, clean and stacked on the open shelf beside the stove. She opened the refrigerator. There was a container of leftover rice, a block of aged cheese, 3 bottles of water, a jar of pickled vegetables, and half a lemon wrapped in a cloth. That was all. She stood looking at it for a moment. She opened the knife block on the counter. 8 knives. Very good ones. Sharp, well-maintained, each in its slot. She looked at the food bowl on the counter. It was empty. It was a beautiful bowl, carved wood, clearly made for a purpose, and it was entirely empty. She was standing there with her hand on the empty fruit bowl when she heard someone in the corridor. Cale stopped in the kitchen doorway. He had changed from his formal ceremony attire into something simpler, dark trousers and a plain shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbows, and he looked more human than he had in the hall, which she had not expected and which made her feel more settled and less settled at the same time. He looked at her standing in his kitchen with her hand on his empty fruit bowl. His expression was the neutral one he seemed to keep for most situations. "Can I help you?" "You have 8 knives," she said. A pause. "Yes. And no fruit." "I don't eat a lot of fruit." She put the bowl down. "You have a bowl for it, though." He looked at the bowl. He looked at her. "My mother gave me the bowl." "Oh," she said, which covered a range of things she was not going to say. He came into the kitchen and opened the refrigerator, not because he was particularly hungry, she sensed, but because it was his kitchen and he was going to demonstrate that by doing something normal in it. He looked at the contents for a moment. He closed it again. He turned and looked at her with the expression of a man who was not accustomed to having someone stand in his kitchen at 5 in the evening and ask him about his knife collection. "Are you comfortable?" he asked. "In the guest room." "Very," she said. Thank you. Another pause. These were clearly going to be a feature of their time together. You don't have to stay in the guest quarters if there's something you need, he said. The keep is large. You can move around freely. That's good to know, she said. I'll probably spend most of my time in here. He looked at her with the measured attention of someone recalibrating their expectations. In the kitchen. I like kitchens, she said. They tell you things. What does mine tell you? She considered him. He had asked the question with the flat delivery of someone who was not sure they wanted the answer but had asked anyway, which told her more than anything else so far. That you have very good taste in equipment, she said, and no one to cook for. The silence that followed was different from the silences in the hall. In the hall, his silences had been barriers. This one was more like a held breath. The knives are the problem, she said, to give him somewhere to go. You have 8 knives and no fruit. The knives need something to cut. They are made for a full kitchen, not a kitchen for one. I see, he said. You don't have to see, she said. I'm just telling you. He looked at her for a moment with the gray eyes she had noticed in the hall, the ones that were doing something more complicated than just looking. You are not what I expected, he said. What did you expect? I don't know, he said. And she believed him, which was interesting, because it was clearly the truth and he clearly had not meant to say it. She nodded once. I'll make dinner, she said. If you tell me what else is in the house. He told her. There was more food in the cold storage room than the refrigerator suggested. He had a tendency, she gathered, to buy things and then not know what to make with them. She worked with what there was and made a simple meal, and he set the table, which he did without being asked, and they ate at the kitchen table instead of the former dining room, which neither of them suggested but both of them seemed to prefer. They talked about small things. About the settlement. About the medical post where she worked. About a drainage issue in the eastern quarter of Aldermore that had been going on for 3 years and that everyone agreed was a problem and no one had fixed, which irritated him more than she had expected. He ate everything she put on his plate. He refilled her water glass before she asked. When she cleared the dishes, she found herself thinking that whatever the next 3 days held, tonight had been easier than she expected. She was wrong, of course. The next 2 days were not easy. They were the kind of complicated that comes from 2 people learning each other's edges. He was rigid about his morning schedule in a way she found excessive. He woke at 5, ran an hour-long circuit of the estate grounds, returned exactly on time, and then sat at his desk for 3 hours before any other human activity was allowed to interrupt him. She was not a morning person and found the precision of it faintly alarming. He, in turn, found her habit of leaving cupboards slightly open after she'd used them maddening in a quiet way he would not mention but that she noticed because his jaw tightened every time he walked past one. She left them open. He closed them. This became a silent daily exchange. She discovered that he read at night. Not administrative documents, not council papers. Actual books. She found this out when she got up at 11 for a glass of water and saw light under the door of his study and knocked to ask if he needed anything, and he opened the door looking startled, with a novel in his hand and reading glasses she had not known he needed propped on his nose. You wear glasses, she said. He looked at them as though he had forgotten. For reading. They suit you, she said, because they did, and because he looked less like the mega alpha king and more like a person with a library, and she liked that version better. He looked at her for a moment. You don't have to tell me things like that. I know, she said. I told you anyway. On the second afternoon, they attended the first required public appearance together, a formal lunch with 6 senior council members and their partners. It was the kind of event where everyone speaks too carefully and means approximately half of what they say. She sat beside him. She watched him move through the conversation with the ease of someone who had done this for 11 years and had learned to perform presence while remaining entirely unreachable. One of the council members asked her about her designation with the particular tone that people use when they are being polite but consider the answer unfortunate. She responded without flinching. She had long practice in not flinching at that tone. Under the table, Kale's hand found her wrist. Not aggressively, not possessively. Just there. A small pressure. A brief contact. She glanced at him. He was answering a question from the council member to his left and appeared to be paying her no attention whatsoever. She looked at his hand. She left her wrist where it was. The second required public appearance was a walk through the marketplace, a tradition she found either charming or ceremonially strange depending on how she thought about it. The market was busy, and people stepped back to make room for Kale with the reflexive deference of a population that had spent 11 years doing so. But several of them looked at her, curious, not unkind, trying to understand. A small girl of about 5 broke through the crowd with the complete indifference to social hierarchy that only small children possess and stopped in front of Lyra and held up a flower. Lyra crouched down and took it. "Thank you," she said. "What's your name?" "Petra," the girl said. "I like your shoes, Petra." Petra looked delighted with herself and ran back to her mother. Lyra stood up with the flower and found Kale watching her with an expression she could not fully read. "What?" she said. "Nothing," he said, and looked away. But on the walk back to the keep, he walked slightly closer to her than he had on the way out. Close enough that their arms almost touched when they moved. She noticed. She was fairly sure he noticed. Neither of them said anything. On the second night, she woke at 2 in the morning and went out to the kitchen for water and instead, without planning to, went out through the door at the end of the corridor that led to the stone steps that went up to the roof. She had found the steps earlier in the day and had been curious. She pushed the door open. He was already there. He was sitting on the low stone bench near the north edge of the roof, his elbows on his knees, his hands loose, looking out over Aldermore. The keep was the tallest structure in the settlement, and from the roof you could see the lights of the market district and the darker shapes of the residential areas and, at the far edge, the line of trees that marked the beginning of park territory. He did not look surprised to see her. He did not look like he was brooding. He looked like a man sitting with something he had been carrying for a long time, not dramatically, just a person at rest with his own weight. She sat down on the bench. Not close enough to crowd him. Close enough to be present. She didn't ask if he was all right. He was not going to answer that question the way it was meant, and they both knew it. She just sat. He was quiet for a while. So was she. The night was cool and the lights of the settlement were soft below them. "I bought this keep intending to fill it," he said finally. Not dramatically. Just a fact he was reporting. "When I first took the position, I thought I would fill it eventually." She waited. 11 years, he said. "Yes," she said. He looked out at the settlement. "The park runs well. The territory is secure. 3 disputes resolved without bloodshed in the past 2 years. The Eastern Drainage Project is finally in the budget for next spring." "Those are good things," she said. "They are," he agreed. He said it without satisfaction. She looked at the settlement lights. "You built the table," she said. "In the kitchen. Not that table specifically, but you know how to build a table. You know what goes in a home. You just haven't used it," he said. "Lived in it," she said. "There's a difference." He turned and looked at her. In the dark, without ceremony around them, without the council and the hall and the 31 women who had not stepped forward, he looked like what he was, a man in his mid-30s who had run a territory with excellence and filled the food bowl with nothing and sat alone on his roof at 2 in the morning. "Why did you step forward?" he asked. It was not the first time he had wanted to ask. She could tell it had been sitting in him since the hall. She thought about the honest answer. "Because you were standing there alone," she said. And that seemed wrong. "A lot of things are wrong," he said. "People don't usually walk into them." "I walk into things," she said. "It's a habit." He almost did something with his mouth. They almost not a smile that she had already started recognizing. "I noticed," he said. They sat there for another while, maybe an hour, maybe more. He talked a little more, not a lot, not a speech, just pieces. About the early years of his reign when he had not been sure he was equal to it. About his father, who had been warm and present in ways that Cale had not known, until he was gone, how rare that was. About a territory dispute from 3 years ago that had come close enough to real danger that he had not slept for a week. She listened. She asked one question when there was space for one. She did not offer solutions or reassurance. She just received what he offered with the steady attention of someone who understood that sometimes people do not need you to fix the thing, they need you to sit with them while they say it. When they went back inside just before dawn, he held the door for her. It was a small thing. She noticed it. She noticed everything she was finding. She noticed the way he straightened when he entered a room full of people and relaxed slightly when he left it. She noticed that he remembered, without being told, that she did not take sugar in her tea. She noticed that when the council member had used that tone about her designation, Cale's jaw had done the tight thing, and she had not mentioned it, but she had noticed. On the third morning, she came into the kitchen to find a bowl of apples on the counter. There was no note. He was not in the kitchen. There was just the food bowl, which had been empty for 2 years, now holding 6 red apples. She stood there looking at them for a long moment. She picked one up. She took a bite. She put it back in the bowl. She did not say anything to him about it when she saw him at breakfast. He did not say anything about it either. They both knew. The third required public appearance was a brief reception at the council hall. It was shorter than the previous events, more formal, less conversation. Afterward, walking back, the night settling around them, she pulled her shawl tighter against the cool air and he slowed his pace to match hers without remark. At the gate of the keep, he stopped. "Tomorrow is the end of the trial period," he said. "I know," she said. After that, he said, and then he stopped, and she waited, and he looked at the gate and then at her. "After that, the decision is yours. Not his." She noted that. The most powerful alpha in 4 territories, standing at his own gate in the dark, telling her the decision was hers. "I know," she said again. He looked at her with the gray eyes that were not doing the through you thing anymore. They were doing something else. Something that was not practiced or performed. Something that had the quality of an unguarded window. "I would like," he started. She waited. "I would like you to stay," he said. Simply. Without decoration. "I would like that. I recognize I have no standing to ask, and that what I offer in terms of the social implications for you, the designation mismatch, the council's likely position, I am aware these are real considerations." "They are," she said. "I am not asking you to ignore them," he said. "I know," she said. "I'm not ignoring them. I'm considering them right alongside the fruit bowl." He looked confused for exactly 1 second, which was, she was learning, the maximum amount of confusion Cale Draven allowed himself before reassembling. "The apples," he said. "You didn't mention them." "No." "And you went and bought them," she said. "Without being asked. Without making it a thing. You just went and filled the bowl." He looked at her steadily. "It needed filling." "Yes," she said. "It did." She went inside. He followed, and held the door, and the night settled behind them. She did not say yes or no that night. She had until morning, and she intended to use the time. But she lay in the large guest room with the 4 pillows and the window looking out over the eastern courtyard, and she thought about a man who ran a territory of 40,000 people and could not keep food in his kitchen, and who had not asked her to step forward and had not expected her to stay and had gone, quietly and without ceremony, and bought apples. She fell asleep before she reached a conclusion. She woke up knowing. The notice arrived on a Tuesday. Lyra was in the middle of sorting a backlog of patient records at the medical post when one of the young administrative staff came in and set an envelope on the desk with the particular careful placement of someone who had been specifically told to deliver it to her personally. The envelope had the council seal in red wax. She had been at the keep for 3 days. She had gone home 4 days ago. She had not given Cale an answer in the formal sense because there had not been a formal asking, and she had been quietly deciding what that meant. The envelope contained a summons to an emergency session of the Elder Council. The session was in 2 hours. She told her supervisor she needed to leave for a personal matter and walked the 12 minutes to the council hall with the measured step of someone who was not running but was also not walking slowly. The council chamber was a room that had been designed to feel important. Stone walls, long table, 7 chairs for the 7 senior elders and 3 for the council members, and a single chair positioned opposite the table for whoever had been called in to explain themselves. She had never been in this room. She sat in the single chair and looked at the 7 elders and 3 council members and waited. Elder Hadwin sat at the center of the table. He looked at her with the careful neutrality of a man managing a situation he had not anticipated needing to manage. "Lyra Voss," he said. "Thank you for coming." "Of course," she said. "You are aware that the 3-day trial period has concluded?" "Yes." "And you are aware that at the end of the trial period, both parties must formally indicate their intention before the council before a bond can proceed?" She was not, specifically, aware of this. No one had told her about this part of the process, possibly because no one had expected her to be the one sitting in this chair. She kept her face even. "I understand," she said, which was not the same thing but was close enough. "The matter before the council," Hadwin said, "relates to certain procedural questions about the compatibility of your designation with the requirements of the bonded king's role." "Procedural questions," she repeated. "They are traditions," said the council member to Hadwin's left, a man named Elder Ferris who had a way of saying words that made them feel like small disapprovals, regarding the qualities expected of the king's bonded partner. "Questions of standing, of territorial representation, of the social function the partner is expected to fulfill within the pack hierarchy." She looked at him. And he looked back at her with the faint elevation of a person who was about to explain something they believed should have been obvious. "An Omega designation," he said, "does not carry the standing required to fulfill those social functions." "What functions specifically?" she said. Ferris blinked. People, she had found, did not often ask him to be specific. The formal representation of the king's household at pack events. Negotiation with allied territories. "I have a formal certificate in administrative mediation and 3 years of patient liaison work," she said. Not aggressively. Just factually. "What specifically do those functions require that I lack?" A small silence around the table. "The question," Hadwin said carefully, "is one of tradition. Of what the role has always been." "I see," she said. "And is tradition the same as law in this case?" Another silence. Longer this time. The door at the side of the council chamber opened. Cale Draven came in. He was not in formal attire. He was dressed the way she had first seen him in his kitchen, the dark trousers, the simple shirt, the sleeves rolled to the elbow. He was, however, wearing the expression he saved for situations that required him to be absolutely clear. He looked at the table. He looked at Lyra. His eye stayed on her for one extra moment before he moved to stand beside the table. "I was not notified of this session," he said. Hadwin looked briefly uncomfortable. "The session was called in your interest, my lord. We wish to resolve the procedural." "In my interest," Cale said, "would be informing me when a session is called about my household. We did not want to put you in the position of—" "I am the Mega Alpha King," Cale said, and he said it without any particular drama, just the flat fact of it. "You do not need to protect me from my own decisions." He sat down. Not in the visitor's chair, not at the head of the table, beside Lyra. In the space to her left, where there was no chair, so he pulled one from the side wall and sat down and set his hands on the table and looked at the council with the patience of a man who was going to outlast the room. Elder Ferris looked at the chair Cale had relocated. He looked at Cale. He looked at Lyra. He said, with slightly less certainty than before, "There are still the questions of standing." "Show me the statute," Cale said. "My lord. The specific statute that prohibits an Omega designation from holding the partner position." "Show me the document." Ferris looked at Hadwin. Hadwin looked at Ferris. There was a quality to this exchange that told her what she had already suspected. There is, Hadwin said carefully, a tradition. Tradition is not statute, Cale said. Is there a written law? The silence that followed had a different texture from the silences in the ceremonial hall. This one was the silence of 7 people trying to find a way around a fact they could not change. There is precedent, Ferris said. Cite it, Cale said. He could not. Not specifically. There were historical tendencies, there were patterns of selection, there were conventions that had solidified over generations until they felt like law without ever becoming one. But when pressed for chapter and verse, the room could not produce it. Elder Hadwin sat back slightly. He was old enough and experienced enough to know when a room had shifted. There is, he said finally, also the matter of a challenge. Cale looked at him. A formal challenge. Raised by Alpha Coven Drake, Hadwin said, with the careful tone of someone lighting a fuse and not sure how long it is. He challenges the validity of the claiming trial on grounds of. I am aware of what Coven Drake's grounds will be, Cale said. He has been waiting for a reason to challenge since I declined to support his eastern expansion 3 years ago. The question is whether the council is going to hear the challenge or dismiss it. The council looked at the table. At each other. At the stone walls that had absorbed 400 years of PAC decisions. We are required, Hadwin said, with the resignation of a man who has run out of room to maneuver, to hear it. Cale nodded once. When? 1 week from today. Cale looked at Lyra. She looked at him. His expression had the stillness it always had, but underneath it, she could see something she had learned to read in 3 days, the particular tight quality around his jaw that meant he was working through a calculation and did not like the result. She turned back to the council. May I ask a question? Hadwin looked faintly as though he wished she wouldn't. Go ahead. If the challenge succeeds, she said, what happens? The claiming trial is invalidated, Hadwin said. The king would be required to submit to a new ceremony. And if it fails? The bond proceeds. She nodded. She folded her hands in her lap with the composure of someone who had handled difficult administrative situations before and had learned that the way you held yourself in a room told people whether or not they had already won. Then we'll attend the hearing, she said. She said we. She heard Cale, beside her, exhale very slightly. Not loudly. Not with any performance. Just a small, quiet release of something. She filed that away. They walked out of the council hall together, side by side, into the late afternoon light of the settlement. For a few minutes they didn't speak, which was fine because they had been learning each other's silences and this one was a thinking one, not a barrier one. You said we, he said finally. I did, she said. You hadn't given me an answer. I know, she said. I was still deciding. And now? She looked at the street ahead of them, at the settlement going about its afternoon business, at the market stalls and the children and the ordinary running of a life that 11 years of excellent rule had made possible. The fruit bowl, she said. He was quiet for a moment. The fruit bowl, he said. You filled it, she said. Without being asked. Without making a speech about it. You just went and did the thing. It's a bowl, he said. With apples in it. I know what it is, she said. I also know what it means. He looked at her sideways. She looked back at him. I'm staying, she said. He did not smile. He almost did the almost thing, and then he did something she had not seen him do before, which was look away, out at the settlement, with the expression of someone receiving something they had waited for so long they were not entirely sure they knew how to hold it yet. They walked the rest of the way to the keep in silence. But she walked beside him, not behind him, and when they reached the gate she went through first and held it, and he walked through, and the gate closed behind them. She went to the kitchen and started making dinner. He sat at the kitchen table and reviewed his papers, which he had started doing during the 3 days, working at the kitchen table instead of his study, and she had not asked him to, but he had appeared with his documents on the second day and taken the chair near the window, She did not mention that. She put water on for tea. She opened the refrigerator. He had gone shopping. Not a small amount. The refrigerator held actual food now, the kind of food you buy when you intend to cook properly: fresh vegetables, herbs, 2 kinds of cheese, a whole chicken, things with color and weight. On the counter beside the fruit bowl, there was a small paper bag she hadn't noticed earlier. She opened it. Lemons. She stood there with a lemon in each hand for a moment. You went shopping, she said. The refrigerator was insufficient, he said, without looking up from his papers. She put the lemons down. She started chopping an onion. Her eyes went sharp and watery and she blinked. You're going to have to tell me how to win the challenge hearing, she said. I'm going to need to prepare, he said. There's a process. Then we prepare, she said. He looked up from his papers. In the kitchen light, with his reading glasses on and his documents spread across her table now, she supposed, he looked like the version of himself she had found on the roof. The real one. The one without the ceremony. You know, he said, the council expected me to dismiss you after the first day. Or you to leave. Either way. I know, she said. 32 women, he said. I know, she said again. You were different, he said, and the simplicity of it, the complete absence of performance in how he said it, was the most direct thing he had yet told her. She kept chopping. I'll try not to make it a thing, she said. He almost smiled. The closest thing to a real one she had seen yet. He went back to his papers. She cooked. Outside, the settlement went on the way settlements do, ordinary and alive and full of its own concerns, none of which were the 2 people in the kitchen of the keep, one reading and one cooking, both of them quietly, carefully learning how to be in the same place. The morning of the challenge hearing arrived with the kind of clear, cold light that feels like a statement. Lyra woke before her alarm and lay looking at the ceiling for approximately 30 seconds before she got up, because lying still when things were going to happen had never been a useful strategy for her. She dressed in the best clothes she owned, which were good but not elaborate, because she had decided that pretending to be something she was not was a weaker position than being very clearly what she was. She was an omega. She had borrowed shoes to her own claiming ceremony. She had a safety pin in her bag at all times and a field medicine reference book on her bedside table and a habit of leaving cupboard door slightly open. These things were true. The challenge was betting that they were disqualifying. She was betting that they were not. She went to the kitchen. Cale was already there. He had made coffee, which was not something she had seen him do before. He usually waited until she was up. He was standing at the counter with a cup in his hand, looking out the window at the courtyard, and he turned when she came in. Coffee, he said, and set a second cup on the counter. She picked it up. It was made the way she took it, which he had noticed somewhere in the past week without her ever specifying. How are you feeling? She asked. He considered this with the genuine attention he gave everything. Clear, he said. Good, she said. Clear is good. He had prepared for the hearing the way he prepared for everything, methodically and without excessive drama. He had reviewed the law. He had consulted the 2 council members who were likely to be sympathetic. He had spent 3 evenings going through the specific grounds of Coven Drake's challenge with her at the kitchen table, explaining each point, asking for her perspective, adjusting his arguments where she had observations that shifted his thinking, which happened more than once. She had not been a passive participant in the preparation. She had read everything he gave her. She had asked questions until she understood the ground she was standing on. She had gone to the council archives herself, on the 3rd day, and requested access to the historical records of bonding ceremonies, and she had found 3 separate cases in the past 160 years where designation mismatches had been formally approved by the council, 2 of them far wider in gap than hers and Cale's. She had brought this to Cale. He had looked at them for a long time. Then he had looked at her. You went to the archives, he said. Someone had to, she said. He had almost smiled. The almost thing was getting more frequent. They arrived at the council hall together, side by side, and the hall was fuller than she had expected. The formal challenge hearing was technically a closed proceeding, but there were ways around that in a settlement where everyone knew everyone, and the word had spread, and there were people in the gallery seats and more standing at the edges with the focused attention of a population that was paying attention because something real was happening. Covin Drake was already there. He was a large man with the particular kind of confidence that comes from being the biggest person in most rooms and having people step back to demonstrate it. He had dark red hair and the build of someone who had spent his whole life as an alpha and had never once had a reason to doubt what that meant. He looked at Lyra with the particular assessment that people like him applied to people like her, a quick calculation that ended in a dismissal. She looked back at him with no particular expression. He looked, briefly, like he had expected something different. The hearing was called to order by Elder Hadwin, who had the resigned expression of a man whose retirement kept getting postponed by history. Drake presented his challenge with the smooth efficiency of someone who had prepared it long before the claiming trier had given him a formal reason. The grounds were threefold: designation incompatibility, insufficient social standing, and a technical argument about the legitimacy of a lottery summons versus a voluntary appearance. The third ground was the weakest. Hadwin dismissed it in the first 10 minutes on the straightforward logic that if the lottery process was invalid, it was invalid for every person it had ever summoned, which would void several hundred pack records, and none of them were going to do that. The first two grounds were the real fight. Drake's counsel argued them well. They quoted precedent, they invoked tradition, they painted a picture of a pack hierarchy that depended on clarity of rank for its stability, and the implied suggestion was that allowing an Omega to hold the highest household position in the territory was a form of disorder that the pack could not sustain. She listened to it all. Beside her, Kale listened without moving. When the floor came to them, he stood. He was good at this. She had known he would be. 11 years of running a territory meant 11 years of standing in rooms full of people and making cases. He was measured and precise, and he cited the legal text with the ease of someone who had memorized them because they were the rules he lived by, not because he had looked them up yesterday. He addressed the designation argument first and dismantled it on statutory grounds, presenting the historical cases she had found in the archives with the clean logic of someone laying down evidence in a sequence that left no room for a gap. He had not asked her to speak. She had not offered. They had agreed on this in the kitchen. He would make the formal legal case, and she would do what she had been doing since the hall, which was be exactly what she was without apology. He was 4 minutes into addressing the standing argument when Elder Ferris interrupted. The question, Ferris said, is not only one of legal statute. It is one of what the pack can sustain. Change of this magnitude. I would like to ask, Kale said, what specifically the pack has failed to sustain in the past 11 years. Ferris looked at him. That is not territory security, Kale said. Stable. 3 disputes resolved without bloodshed. Economic agreements with 4 allied packs. The drainage project that has been a problem since before my time and is now funded. These are outcomes, not rhetoric. The pack has sustained them. I built them alone, and they are strong. He paused. They would be stronger with someone beside me. He sat down. He looked at her sideways. Just briefly. She kept her face even but her hands, folded in her lap, pressed slightly together. Drake's counsel made a final argument. It was polished. It was not, she thought, strong enough, but it was polished. Then Drake himself stood. The issue, he said, with the confidence of a man who had been in rooms like this and usually prevailed, is not the king's fitness to rule. No one questions that. The issue is the kind of example this sets. What it tells every alpha in this territory and beyond about how we value the order we built. An omega beside the mega alpha king tells every person of standing that standing does not matter. He looked at Lyra directly. Not with cruelty. With the calm certainty of someone who believed what they were saying. That is not a sustainable message. The room was quiet. Lyra stood up. Kale looked at her. She had not told him she was going to do this. She had not planned it. She just looked at Drake and stood up, and Hadwin, out of professional reflex, recognized her. Standing does not matter, she said. That's what you said. Drake looked at her. That is the message. You said it tells people standing does not matter, she said. I want to ask you something. The small boy who got lost in the market 14 days ago and was found by someone who stopped and helped him back to his mother. His mother's standing doesn't determine whether that matters. The elderly woman in the medical post who sat alone and frightened because she had no family and needed someone to stay. Her standing doesn't determine whether that matters. Standing tells you someone's rank. It doesn't tell you what they do with it. Drake looked at her steadily. That is a sentiment, he said. Not a legal argument. No, she agreed. It isn't. The legal argument was already made. I'm telling you something else. She looked at him with the calm of someone who had never needed a title to feel certain she was in the right place. I stepped forward in that hall because someone was standing alone and that seemed wrong. I didn't know what I was stepping into. I didn't have a plan. I had a direction and I moved in it. That is what I do. And I have been doing it in this settlement for 8 years, without standing, without title, without anyone's permission. She looked at the elders. If the pack cannot sustain that, then the question is not about my designation. It is about what the pack values. She sat down. The room was very quiet. Drake looked at the elders. They looked at the table. They looked at each other. Hadwin looked at Lyra with an expression she could not fully read but that had the quality of a man updating a calculation. The deliberation took 37 minutes. She and Cale sat in the side hall outside the council chamber. He had brought water. He handed her a cup. She took it. They sat in the quiet that was a thinking quiet, not a burial quiet, not the heavy silence of the ceremonial hall but the kind of silence that happens between people who are tired in the same way. You didn't tell me you were going to speak, he said. I didn't know I was, she said. The part about the lost child, he said. In the market. She looked at her water cup. It was true. I know, he said. He was looking at the far wall with the expression she had learned was not blankness but the particular way his face looked when something was happening inside it that he had not yet found words for. I know it was true. He said nothing else. She waited, because she had learned to wait. I want you to understand something, he said finally. All right, she said. I have been very good, he said, at operating alone. I don't have the habit of, he stopped. He was a man who was precise with words and he was finding the precise ones with some difficulty. I don't have the habit of considering someone else in my decisions. I want to learn that habit. I am telling you this because I expect I will get it wrong, sometimes, and I would rather you know I understand the problem than discover I'm not aware of it. She looked at him. He was looking at the wall. That's a very honest thing to tell me, she said. It seemed relevant, he said. She nodded. She finished her water. She set the cup down. I get attached to things, she said. To people. To situations I probably shouldn't stay in as long as I do. I decide something is my problem when sometimes it isn't my problem, and I stay with it longer than is strictly practical. I leave cupboard doors open. I've noticed the cupboard doors, he said. I know you have, she said. He looked at her then. Full face, not sideways. The grey eyes doing the window thing, the real version thing. I went and bought apples, he said. You did, she said. I didn't say anything about it. No, she said. But you did it. He nodded once, a slow nod that had the quality of an agreement being reached. The council doors opened. Hadwin appeared in the doorway. The council is ready, he said. They stood together and went back in. The great hall was full. Lyra did not know how it had happened so fast. The formal challenge hearing was supposed to be a closed proceeding, and it had been, but the deliberation had taken 37 minutes and in 37 minutes in a settlement like Aldermore, things moved. People talked. Word went out through the market, through the residential streets, through the quiet networks of a community that had been watching this particular story unfold for 14 days with the concentrated attention of a population that understood, without anyone needing to say it directly, that something important was being decided. She and Cale walked into the full hall, and it shifted around them, not parting theatrically, not the way it might in a story someone was telling later and needed to be impressive, but the ordinary rearranging that happens when two people walk into a space and the space acknowledges that something significant is occurring. She saw faces she recognized. The woman from the market who had smiled at her the previous week. Two of the staff from the medical post who were supposed to be on shift but apparently were not. The small girl Petra and her mother, near the back. She saw people she did not recognize, pack members from districts she hadn't been to, people who had heard something and come to see. She saw 31 women, scattered through the crowd, some of them watching her with expressions that ranged from uncertain to something that looked, she thought, like something they might not have expected to feel, a kind of solidarity that had not existed in that ceremonial line but was developing now, in retrospect, as the story acquired a shape. She saw Coven Drake standing near the side wall with the contained expression of a man who did not know yet whether he had won or lost and was preparing for both. Elder Hadwin took his position at the front of the hall. He looked older than usual, she thought. Not frail, just weighted. He carried the history of the park in the way long service makes you carry things, and she understood that whatever he said next, he had thought about it carefully. The council has deliberated, Hadwin said, and the hall took a breath, on the former challenge raised by Alpha Coven Drake against the validity of the claiming trial between King Cale Draven and Lyra Voss, Omega designation. The room held itself still. The council finds as follows, Hadwin said. On the matter of the lottery summons, the process was valid. The summons was legally issued. On the matter of designation compatibility, a review of the historical record establishes no written statute prohibiting the bonding of an Omega designated partner to a king or alpha of any rank. Tradition is not statute. The council acknowledges the tradition. The council cannot enforce it as law. A sound moved through the hall. Not loud. Just the collective exhale of a room processing something. Hadwin looked at Drake. The challenge is not sustained. Drake looked at the elders for a moment. His face was controlled. He nodded, once, with the discipline of a man who had played a formal game and lost it by formal rules and would conduct himself accordingly. He was many things, Lyra thought, but he was not a person who broke the rules of the room he was in. He stepped back. He said nothing. Hadwin turned to the center of the hall, to the space where Cale and Lyra stood. Under park law, he said, the claiming trial having been completed and the challenge having been dismissed, the bond may now be formally recognized. He paused. There was something in the pause that was not strictly procedural, something that had the quality of a man who had been doing his job for 40 years and was paying attention to this particular moment. King Draven. Do you wish to proceed? Cale turned to her. He did not look at Hadwin. He did not look at the crowd, or the elders, or Coven Drake standing at the wall, or the 31 women who had not stepped forward. He looked at her. I would like to speak first, he said, and his voice carried in the hall without effort, the way voices do when the room is listening. Hadwin said, the floor is yours. He was quiet for a moment. Not working up to something, not building to a speech. Just the particular stillness of a person deciding how honest to be in a room full of people. There have been 32 ceremonies before this one, he said. 32 women stood in this hall, and 32 of them did what was reasonable, which was recognized that standing across from this position is not a comfortable thing to do. He did not say it with bitterness. Just the plain fact of it. I have not blamed any of them. I understood their calculation. I had even, at various points, made peace with the likely conclusion of this process, which was that no one would choose it. The hall was the same quiet that it had been at the original ceremony. But different. That quiet had been the quiet of avoidance. This one was the quiet of attention. 14 days ago, he said, a woman came into this hall late because she had stopped in the street to help a lost child find his mother. He paused. She raised her hand. She walked forward. She did not do it because she had a plan. She told me herself she did not have a plan. She did it because someone was alone and that seemed wrong to her, and she is not a person who sees something wrong and walks past it. He looked at her. She looked back at him. She was not going to look at the floor or at the crowd or at anything except his face, which was the real face, the one from the roof and the kitchen, the one that was not performing anything. I have been a king for 11 years, he said. I have run this territory with everything I have. I am proud of what this park has built. I am not proud of what I let myself stop expecting. He stopped. He had the slightly careful look of someone choosing the next words with precision. I stopped expecting anyone to walk toward me. I arranged myself around that absence until I had mistaken it for preference. Another pause. The food bowl was empty for 2 years, he said. She told me it needed filling. I went and filled it. It was not a difficult thing to do. I had simply stopped doing it. Someone in the hall made a very small sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a cry. She couldn't tell where it came from. I am not making a speech about love, he said, because he was honest and direct and could not claim something fully formed that was still becoming. I am making a speech about a person who looked at me like I was someone who could be known, and stayed when she could have left, and went to the archives and found the cases the council hadn't cited, and made dinner and left the cupboard doors open and sat on the roof at 2 in the morning and listened without telling me what to think. He looked at her steadily. I am asking her, in front of every person in this hall who has an opinion about it, if she will stay. She had walked to the front of the hall. She had not decided to. She had started moving while he was still speaking because her feet had made the decision before her head had finished processing the speech, and she was standing in front of him before she had a clear thought about what she intended to say. He looked at her with the window expression. The real one. Yes, she said. Not elaborately. Not with a speech to match his. Just the single word, in the direction of his face, because the rest of it, the years they hadn't lived yet, the mornings with coffee made the right way and cupboard doors left open and the food bowl that was going to stay full now, the work of being two people who had agreed to be known, all of that was going to happen in the ordinary time of ordinary days, and it didn't need a crowd for it. He looked at her for a moment. Then he did the thing she had been waiting for him to do. He smiled. Not the practiced version that reached nowhere. The real one. It arrived in his eyes first and then his mouth, unexpected and a little unsteady, like something that had been waiting a very long time and was not entirely sure of its own face yet. She thought, there it is. Elder Hadwin spoke the formal words of recognition. She was only half listening. She was looking at the man in front of her who had bought apples without being asked and learned how she took her coffee and told her his vulnerabilities on a side hall bench before a challenge hearing, and who was standing in the hall he had stood in 32 times with a smile she was fairly sure no one in this room had seen before. The hall made a sound that a hall makes when it has been holding itself together and decides it no longer needs to. It was not exactly applause and not exactly relief. It was the sound of people who had been watching something that mattered, exhaling. She looked at Petra near the back of the room, who was holding her flower and waving it with the complete wholehearted enthusiasm of a 5-year-old who had no idea what the ceremony meant but understood that the woman from the market was smiling and that this was good. She laughed. It came out before she could be dignified about it, a real laugh, at a flower being waved by a small girl in the back of a formal hall, and Kale looked at her with the expression of a man discovering that laughing was something that could happen here, in this room, in this moment, and that the world had not ended. He did not laugh. He was not there yet. But he looked like he was considering the possibility of laughing, which was, she thought, enough for now. They walked out of the hall together. Not with ceremony. Not through a crowd that parted with dramatic respect. The crowd did part, but it did it naturally, the way a crowd parts for two people it has decided to make room for. Several people said things. She heard fragments, congratulations and good luck and the Eastern Drainage Project better still be in the budget, which came from a man near the door who apparently had a personal stake in it and was not going to let a bond ceremony make him forget. It's in the budget, Kale told him, without breaking stride. Outside, the afternoon light had the particular gold of a day that had been cold at the start and warmed as it went. The settlement went on around them, the market and the street and the ordinary work of a community that had just witnessed something and would now, having witnessed it, continue with its afternoon. She walked beside him. He walked beside her. His hand found hers. Not dramatically. Not with a speech. Just his hand, moving to hers, the same steady pressure as the wrist in the council lunch weeks ago, and she held it, and they walked. The park will argue, he said, for a while. I know, she said. There will be people who don't accept it. There always are, she said. Drake will find another angle eventually. Probably, she said. We'll deal with it. He looked at her sideways. We, he said. We, she said back. You keep being surprised by that word. I'm not surprised, he said. I'm not used to it yet. You get used to it, she said. They walked. The keep was ahead of them, large and solid and no longer, she thought, just a building that was waiting to be used. It was a place where someone had bought apples and left the reading glasses on while answering the door and learned how to make coffee at 5 in the morning in case she was up early. She would move her things in this week. The field medicine book would go on the shared bedside table. The safety pin would stay in her bag because you never knew. The cupboard doors would continue to be a minor domestic tension, which was fine, which was the texture of things. The drainage project, she said. He looked at her. What about it? I want to understand the full scope of it. I need to if I'm going to be useful. He was quiet for a moment. You don't have to take on the council work immediately. I know, she said. I want to. I'm useful when I understand things, and I understand things when I know them, and I know them when I learn them. He considered this. I'll give you the files tonight. Good, she said. They reached the gate. She pushed it open. He came through. She let it close. In the kitchen, the fruit bowl sat on the counter with its 6 red apples, and the knife block held its 8 knives, and the refrigerator was full, and 2 cups were on the shelf next to each other because that was where they lived now. She filled the kettle. He sat at the table and pulled a stack of papers toward him. Outside, the settlement went on in the ordinary way of things that go on after the important thing has happened, noisily, warmly, full of small details and irrelevant concerns and the daily work of being alive. He looked up from his papers. She was standing at the counter with her hands around the kettle handle, waiting for the water to heat, and she was looking at the fruit bowl, and she was smiling at nothing in particular, or perhaps at something in particular, and either way he watched her for a moment with the expression of a man who has begun, slowly and without fanfare, to understand what it feels like when the thing you stopped expecting arrives and turns out to have borrowed shoes and a safety pin and the habit of living. Cupboard doors open. He went back to his papers. She made tea. Outside, nobody paid any particular attention to the King's Keep, because that was what happened when something that had been too long in coming finally, quietly, landed in exactly the right place. The park would argue about it for years. Whether an Omega could hold the title. Whether tradition had bent or broken. What the rule book said and whether the rule book was the right book to consult. Whether Covin Drake would try again, and when, and whether it would matter. They would argue. And inside the kitchen of the keep, 2 people who had not planned any of this would drink their tea and walk through their papers and disagree about the cupboard doors and wake up early and go to sleep late and learn each other in the way that people learn each other when they have decided that this is the direction and they are moving in it. And the fruit bowl would never be empty again.